So why is Carlos Ghosn back in a Japanese jail? The once all-powerful boss of the Renault-Nissan alliance was planning his big counteroffensive. A press conference next week had been planned. We're going to review the latest twist, its motives, and its timing, which comes amid fresh scrutiny over the perks and payments afforded to the Franco-Brazilian Lebanese corporate titan, Renault. Now the ones to flag alleged payments, this time to a subsidiary in Oman that's to have funneled funds to pay for everything from, well, a British Virgin Islands registered yacht to startup money for Ghosn's son. More broadly, we're still up against two competing narratives. The tale of a corporate hero nicknamed Le Cost Killer, but who outlived his time and grew insufferable before an overdue comeuppance. Or, if you prefer, the story of a struggling Japanese automaker that now back on firm footing reverts to government-backed economic nationalism, and when Renault tries to go for a full-blown merger, well, Nissan conveniently discovers that it's got creative bookkeeping in its midst. Which is it then? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, is Carlos Ghosn a victim or a villain? And joining us from Tokyo, investigative reporter Jake Adelstein, who is up at a very early hour. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
I'm delighted to be joining you.
Attorney Jessica Fennell of the firm of Zimrain Finel, which represents the Ghosn family. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And William Dean, former correspondent for Ward's Automotive. Nice to see you again.
I'm glad to be back.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect 770,000 euros in compensation from Renault for the fourth time since November. Carlos Ghosn's been arrested in Tokyo as his former company seems to be turning on him.
If prosecutors thought they could gather enough evidence for another prosecution, they should have just slapped on additional charges. I don't understand why they detained him. If anything, they chose to torment him through a form of hostage justice. They're trying to gain an upper hand.
Jake Adelstein, he was already under very strict parole terms. Why is he back in jail?
Well, I mean, the most obvious answer is that these charges related to Umon, the Japanese prosecutors were interrogating him voluntarily without arresting him for a number of time. And obviously, he clearly did not sign the statements that they wanted him to sign and was not cooperating the way that they wanted to cooperate. And then he tweeted through a third party that he would be holding a press conference where he would tell the truth and make everything clear. And that doesn't help the prosecution in the court of public opinion. So the easiest thing to do, and what the prosecution always does in Japan, is arrest him and hold him prisoner and use that detention to try and get him to cooperate with the scenario they want to win. Japanese prosecutors, like prosecutors all over the world, don't like to lose. And when only 1% of all indicted cases are lost, you don't want to be on the team that's in that 1% because it's not very good for your career.
The terms of his parole, did they not state that he wasn't to communicate over social media?
They stated that he couldn't use the internet. So technically, he didn't violate his conditions by having someone tweet that for him. It's just like having his lawyer speak on his behalf. I'm sure that they weren't happy with that. And that may have been one of the things that provoked, well, I wouldn't say provoked, but to them justified arresting him. Because every time his lawyer goes in front of the press and talks about the case and criticizes the prosecution, they look very bad. And the lawyer on the 3rd, the day before he was actually arrested, which was yesterday morning, had a big press conference at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, and he said that, I don't think Ghosn is going to receive a fair trial, and that the Nissan as a company and Ghosn as a defendant need to be tried in separate cases with different lawyers and different judges. And he did a very lucid explanation of why that was necessary for Ghosn to have a fair trial. Considering all those circumstances, I think the prosecution became concerned that they might be losing in the public eye and possibly in the court case themselves. And they did what they always do, which is throw people in jail.
Is it going to work, though, or is it going to backfire, putting him back in jail?
I think it's backfiring in terms of public image and Japan's international reputation. In terms of getting what they want, it may actually succeed.
Let me ask you about this, Jessica Finel. What's the next step now with your client back in jail?
Well, unfortunately, we don't know. Unfortunately, he's now back in police custody for what could be up to 23 days. And after these 23 days of police custody, where he will have almost no rights of defense at all, he might be placed in pretrial detention. So it might last for another while. We don't know. What we know, and I completely agree with what was just said, is that this is a measure of retaliation from the prosecution. This is the sign of the prosecution's harassment of our client. The prosecution, who is very probably acting in complicity with the support of some Nissan's people inside Nissan.
What makes you say that?
That's the opinion that our client has. He doesn't say that the whole firm is against him, but
that's a pretty strong accusation. What makes you say it?
Because this is how the story was built since the beginning. I mean, I cannot go further than that here, but this is how the story was built since last year makes our client believe that some people within Nissan are behind this with the complicity of the prosecution.
Okay, it all started, Bildine, with a whistleblower?
It started with a whistleblower. Somebody said to the authorities in Japan, hey, this guy has cheated and we need to do something about it. I don't know whether that was the new Japanese president of Nissan or somebody down in the ranks somewhere. But whistleblowers are people who see something going on that they think is not right, and they blow their whistle. This happened in Washington, D.C., in the White House yesterday. Some low-ranking person blew the whistle on all the security passes that were given out by the Trump administration. It could be the same kind of thing that's going on in Japan. We don't know. It's never come out in light.
But Jessica Finel, it sounds like you think you know, or at least that's what you're hinting. Do you know who blew the whistle?
I mean, I don't want to speak about that before our client does. You know, that was also the point of him expressing himself. He will do it publicly. He will explain what's his point of view on the question. But what I want to say very obviously is that the way the prosecution is acting is really the sign of a harassment against our client, and the sign that the prosecution was really humiliated when our client was released a month ago, and that nothing justifies today that he's put back in pretrial detention or in custody, because he was under a very strict restraining order and he was respecting all his obligations, because he's presumed innocence and he claims very loudly his innocence, and because the rule should be the freedom, and there's nothing that justifies putting him. He's not dangerous, he's not compromising evidence, he's not getting in touch with the wrong people. He has not respected his restraining order.
All right, so you have the Japanese portion of the case, but now we're starting to see a French portion of the case. The announcement of a press conference next week came as Renault has forwarded to prosecutors suspicions over Nissan's Oman subsidiary. Kathy Clifford has the story.
Fresh allegations against Carlos Ghosn as an internal investigation at Renault is handed over to French prosecutors. Media reports cite sources saying the car maker has found it paid out millions of euros described as dealer incentives, dished out to Omani distributor Suhail Bawan Automobiles over 5 years from around 2011. The move by Renault follows reports over past months about Nissan's relationship with the Omani firm, which has been the French car maker's exclusive distributor in Oman since 2004. This after Nissan found that its own regional subsidiary made murky payments of over 26 million euros to the same body. Renault's internal audit reportedly found most of the cash was then channeled to a Lebanese company controlled by Ghosn Associates, with sources saying the total sum paid by the car maker is in double digits of millions of euros, and that the money may have been used to repay personal debt. Carlos Ghosn's French lawyers said, "We categorically deny the allegations of potential embezzlement in Oman." The new allegations could draw Renault further into the scandal. It initially tried to avoid involvement, refraining from sharing the Japanese partner's findings with its own board for several weeks. However, Ghosn was eventually forced out as Renault chairman and CEO in January. The alliance partners launched an independent audit of their joint finances the following month, tallying some 1.2 million euros in questionable spending.
Okay, so denial of embezzlement by your team, but maybe it was above board. Was there legally payments made for these 4 corporate jets, for the yacht that was registered in the British Virgin Islands, for the startup of Carlos Ghosn's son? Did the money go from Oman to Ghosn?
As you recorded, our client and the team states very strongly that none of these payments were made, and that the initial payment to Oman were made for commercial purposes only. So he's strongly denying that again.
All right, so Bill Dean, why is Renault forwarding these documents? And we're hearing more hints now from the French finance minister that he's got other evidence, although he won't say what it is.
Yes, we in the public are a little bit hamstringed because we don't know what the facts are. But what we do know is that as these audits have gone on, they found many questionable movements of money, and I think the administrators of Renault, who had hired and were supposed to be looking over Carlos Ghosn since 2005 when he became CEO, they let him do anything for a long time. They didn't care. And now that they're looking at what happened to some of the corporate assets, I think now they're looking more closely at the past as well. I think Carlos Ghosn probably was a man who was full of himself, was full of power, and as the British Baron Lord Acton said one time, power tends to corrupt people. And when you're at the top of 3 big car companies and you have all that money going through and all those credit cards, maybe it looks just right to have the company pay for your wedding at the Chateau de Versailles.
The wedding reception, yeah. It's but again, we saw the justification in 2016 when there was an initial row over his CEO pay here in France, and he said, "Yeah, but I'm the guy who saved Nissan." He was nicknamed 7-Eleven because he worked from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day.
He worked hard. He worked very hard. He flew those 4 corporate jets all the time. He really had a good manner of working. I think he saved Nissan. He brought it from nowhere. I think also that being in charge of Nissan, being in charge of Renault, and being in charge of the Nissan-Renault alliance, or the Renault-Nissan alliance, that was a lot of power in one man. I asked him one time at a press conference, well, what happens if you're not around? What's the line of succession at Renault, Nissan? And he said, well, that's no problem. The authorities will take care of that. But he never had a succession planned. He was just going to keep on going. He got an extra 4 years the last time he came up for a contract at Renault.
Jake Adelstein, it's been nearly 5 months since that initial arrest, was spectacular arrest at Tokyo Airport. What do the Japanese now make of Carlos Ghosn?
Well, I mean, I think, the Japanese considered him a hero, and then he was arrested, and they assumed he was a villain. And then he made a statement in court where he expressed his love for Nissan and how much he had worked on behalf of the company and how he felt betrayed. And that actually struck a chord with a lot of Japanese people. There's a huge amount of sympathy for him. And part of that is because as time has gone on, it's become very clear that Nissan collaborated with the prosecutors to put him in jail. And the timeline has become clear as well. It's a matter of public record that Harinada, a Nissan executive, and Onuma, another Nissan executive, made a plea bargain with the prosecutors early on in this investigation, in which they have no criminal charges facing them, in exchange for them making statements that are disadvantageous to Ghosn. That is collaboration between the prosecution and Nissan. And even the Japanese who, tend to believe the authorities when they make a statement, even though many times it's been proven the prosecutors are very, very wrong and convict the wrong people, have sort of been leaning the way that Ghosn is certainly not being treated fairly. Whether he's innocent or not, everybody is still sort of waiting for the evidence.
Yeah, because what do they make of these this scrutiny into his lifestyle, into these allegations, these latest allegations regarding money that was paid?
Well, I think that, if you would ask the typical Japanese, or what I'm hearing from people who are law enforcement or lawyers or ex-prosecutors, is that, what it sounds like is that he is both a victim and a villain. Nissan, as early as April of last year, on the cover of Japanese business magazines, there were articles that had these headlines like "Betrayal of Nissan by Carlos Ghosn," saying that Renault was going to take over Nissan and Nissan would no longer be a Japanese company. So everybody knew this was going to happen. And it seems like executives of Nissan decided that the easiest way to stop this from happening was getting rid of Carlos Ghosn. And after having a conference on how to get rid of him, they approached Kumada, a lawyer who is also an ex-special prosecutor, who is also a political and legal advisor to the Prime Minister of Japan. Then Kumada spoke to the prosecutors in the same office that are prosecuting Ghosn at the present, who are also his kohai, which in Japanese meaning like his juniors. It's a very senior-junior kind of relationship in Japan called senpai kohai. I think William understands that pretty well. And, the investigation and the collaboration between Nissan and the prosecutors was green-lighted. So everybody can sort of see that the writing was on the wall. And whether he's innocent or guilty is kind of secondary in Japanese justice system once he's indicted, because he's only supposed to have a 1% chance of actually being found innocent on any charges.
Is he going to beat the rap?
No, I don't think so. Maybe a couple charges, but all of them, no. It's just a matter of what is the statement that the prosecutors... there's a Japanese saying, if you fire enough shots, you'll hit something. And that tends to be true. They keep stacking up the charges. Probably one or two of them will stick.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at more broadly a point that Bill was mentioning regarding corporate governance and what is acceptable for a long time and then suddenly is no longer. Are we witnessing perhaps a change with the debate going on in this country, not just over Carlos Ghosn, but more broadly over CEO pay? Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the latest twist with a fourth arrest of Carlos Ghosn in Tokyo. This as he was preparing to counter fresh charges that are being leveled not just in Tokyo, but also here in France from Renault and Nissan. We're talking about it in the company of Jake Adelstein, investigative reporter who joins us from Tokyo. Here in the studio, we're with attorney Jessica Fennell of the firm of Zimre and Fennell, which represents the Ghosn family, and William Dean, former correspondent for Ward's Automotive. The Renault-Nissan alliance, founded in 1999, not too long after, the group created for itself a common holding. This unassuming office building is the headquarters of RNBV. That's the holding's name since its move to Amsterdam in 2002. Why the Netherlands? Because, quote, this country is neutral and does not state a preference between France and Japan. That's according to a spokesperson for Renault in 2014. Of course, when you think the Netherlands, is that the real reason, Bill Dean?
I think that corporations and people often look for the cheapest way to get through life. And I think there's probably some tax advantage for Renault and for Nissan to be there, but specifically for Renault.
This holding seemed to grow and grow over the years. There's all this talk about this special advisor to the chief executive officer who's alleged to have received lots of payments, and people are wondering why payments made as well to politicians and to people in the communications business. A lot of scrutiny over this holding. And again, why is it in the Netherlands? tax optimization purposes?
I don't know, because I wasn't part of Renault's decision-making process. Renault always said this is a good thing to do. It doesn't make sense from most ways of looking at things. Renault owns 38 or 39% of Nissan. Nissan owns 15% of Renault. Renault is in charge. They need to do some things for Nissan to keep from looking like they want to take over Nissan. As a business plan, they do need to give Nissan liberty. And if Nissan was worried about that, maybe that explains something, as Jake was saying. But in fact, Renault saved Nissan. Renault owns most of Nissan. Renault controls Nissan. And they moved, maybe they moved to Netherlands to help Carlos Ghosn move money around. I don't know.
Jessica Fennell, let me ask you about this, because if Renault owns most of Nissan, let's remind people that until in a not too distant past, it was the French state that owned most of Renault. It's no longer the case, but they do have a controlling share, a minority shareholder in the company. Renault, a national institution in this country. People don't follow the day-to-day workings of corporate governance, but there was shock in this country over the fact that you have this entity in the Netherlands that clearly seems to be for tax avoidance purposes.
I absolutely will not speak about this. This has nothing to do with the case at the moment. I just want to recall, because I've heard your other guest here, I just want to recall that there is a strong presumption of innocence that has to be respected for Mr. Ghosn. And when we hear what you said, it looks like, he's already guilty of something. He's not guilty of anything. He's presumed innocent. So far, we don't know anything of what is in the prosecutor's case file in Japan. And if we start to apply to him the same treatment as the Japanese law and judicial system does, then that's the end of everything, right? I mean, he's the subject of an abusive process, obviously. I just want to recall that a month ago, we submitted a filing before the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention to have his detention characterized as arbitrary because he's not benefiting of a fair trial, because he didn't have a proper access to the case file, to his lawyer, because he's been detained under very inhuman conditions. And so it's very important, so that he can defend himself and present his case, that everyone here understands that he is presumed innocent.
But the more light is put on the case, does it make it harder for you when you have, for instance, these reports that Carlos Ghosn pays his taxes in Belgium, where the tax rate is more advantageous? That makes a lot of people bitter who work on the factory assembly line here in France.
Well, so far there is no criminal lawsuit about that point anyway. And what is in Japan at the moment, the way that the allegations and the prosecution is being conducted, maybe you believe that it makes it more difficult for us, but it also makes it easier because it shows the harassment that he's the subject of.
And the fact that it's Renault now giving information to the French prosecutor's office, what does that tell you?
Renault, in my knowledge, didn't file a complaint, and that means something. They brought some information to the attention of the French prosecutor, and it's a very different thing. They had to do it. It's a matter of image, right? They had to protect themselves and do it as long as it comes from the prosecution case in Japan, who informed them about some allegations. So they had to do it.
But but there's also this recommendation that came out on Wednesday that they want to curtail, telling shareholders to vote against giving Carlos Ghosn his full pension package to the tune of 770,000 euros.
Yes, but again, it's a matter of communication and image and nothing else so far. And so far, we have no elements about anything as far as criminal law is concerned. We have no evidence, no element, and he's totally presumed innocent, and this had to be recalled.
So Renault is not throwing Carlos Ghosn under the bus at this point?
Well, Renault has not been supporting Carlos Ghosn. We can't say the opposite, of course. But I think that, as Mr. Carlos Ghosn said, the attitude of Renault has also been the attitude of the French state, which means that the French state has kept his distance to protect itself since the beginning.
William Dean, Renault, a national institution, again, it's in industrial folklore in this country. This car maker. Again, the question of what's legal is one thing, and what happens in the court of public opinion is another. When it comes.
Yes, I'll perfectly admit that Jessica is quite right. The presumption of innocence has to be there. I presume he's innocent of a crime until he's proven guilty. But I don't have to. I can also believe that he's not been a perfect leader for this French company. He's made some money, but I think that, for example, the Gilets jaunes that we have in France now,
The yellow vest protest.
the yellow vest people who are saying, life is so hard, it's not right, there's unfairness around, and they look at what's happening with Carlos Ghosn, a rich man who's made salaries of $7 or $8 million a year at Renault and the same at Nissan, and he goes to Belgium to not pay his taxes. A couple of years ago, there was a report in Reuters that the bankers for Renault-Nissan figured out a way how Carlos Ghosn could get money afterwards, for bonuses, even if the shareholders voted against them. So just this kind of manipulation of things, perhaps perfectly legal, like moving to Amsterdam can be legal, but all those little moves piled up together and now exposed in one moment, I think in France, it's more difficult to find supporters.
Jake Adelstein, I know you don't have a yellow vests movement in Japan, but is there growing resentment over the gap between the haves and the have-nots and the tax optimization that takes place in these big corporations?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that Ghosn is disliked by some people in Japan and in France is that he's a very well-paid person. It's hard to feel empathy for someone who is very rich and kind of arrogant. No offense, Jessica. And there's a feeling that one of the reasons that he sort of had these payments diverted, or discussed having the payments diverted, because even the question that he actually had the payments diverted is debatable at best, was because the Japanese reaction to CEOs being paid astronomical amount of money is outrage and bad for the public image and bad for getting people to buy Nissan cars.
Yeah, Japanese CEO pay in general is also something that's closely watched.
Yeah, it is. Magazines publish list of the most overpaid CEOs. It's like an annual feature in the weekly magazines or the monthly magazines. Everybody does one. Japan's the most highest paid CEOs. And there's always a debate when these articles come out about why is this person being paid so much. The Japanese sense of fairness. And in fact, this society is often sort of worked as kind of a socialist, but not openly socialist society, as people consider it unfair, especially when the average Japanese worker has not seen their pay go up in years.
The French shareholder defense group Proxinvest put out a survey last year showing that CEO pay in this country, which had plateaued, has started to skyrocket again in 2016 and 2017. Now, with word that the CEO of Airbus, when he retires next week, will earn up to 1.3 million euros a year. You have further outrage, and after Renault's recommendation that shareholders, severely prune Carlos Ghosn's retirement package, the French finance minister is promising a law to cap company pensions for CEOs.
These amounts are excessive. They belong to the past, to a different type of capitalism. We will set up a number of measures to stop this. First, transparency over salaries. I will cap company pensions for CEOs at 30% of their salary, and this will be put into law.
More transparency for salaries, is that a good idea?
I mean, you ask me that question. I'm not here to speak about morality.
Of course.
I'm here to speak about legality, right? And the morality is a totally different question. But in terms of legality, I'm just saying that it's not because someone's behavior is looked at by, the population as being immoral, which is really another debate, that person should not benefit from basic rights. And that's what I'm here to tell you. You see, I can't answer anything else than that.
What do you make of Bruno Le Maire's statement this Thursday there?
Well, I think it might make it hard for French industrial companies to attract the people they want to attract. Renault would never have bought Nissan if it didn't have Carlos Ghosn to send to do the job. Louis Schweitzer said that clearly in 1999. You need to have some flexibility, and if Bruno Le Maire puts a cap on money, that reduces flexibility.
In this case, very specifically on pensions, because
pensions are just another way for a boss to make money. That's the whole argument for one of Carlos Ghosn's defenses is, hey, I didn't have this money that I'm being charged with. It was supposed to come maybe when I retire. So, the millions and the millions that are involved, everybody looks for a way to.
But we're seeing, by the way, other measures. It's not just the capping of his pension package.
No.
It's also the splitting up of the job of president of the board and CEO, which
was a very good idea from a corporate governance point of view.
Which is something you don't often see in France. Most of the time, the same person has both jobs. And a reduction in the numbers of the members of the board. Are these boards going to continue to be, as you described in part one of our discussion, these rubber stamp bodies?
They shouldn't be, ever, but that's the way they're treated. People who live in that upper level of life, CEOs of different companies, and you ask your friend that you met at Davos to, why don't you come on our board next year? That'll be good for some certain amount of money and some travel expenses and whatnot. So that it's a little bit of a closed circle, like I suppose a rugby team has got its way of doing things. But that closed circle, if it's up at a real high level of life, and if it's a little bit scrungy to look at, people don't like it right now.
All right, we'll see about that. We're entering this new era of transparency. We're also entering a new era for Renault. The Financial Times, among those reporting a few months back, that weeks after Carlos Ghosn, back in February of 2018, had told Nissan of plans to make the alliance with Renault irreversible, well, Japanese execs claimed they'd secured the solid support of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and of Japan's chief cabinet secretary to apply the brakes. Then in April, the METI, Japan's Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry, all stepped in with phone calls that were made here to Paris, even visits. You have, I guess, Jake Adelstein, where France and Japan are a bit alike, is that the state is often involved in what are called national champions. And in this case, are we seeing a resurgence of economic nationalism, which is part of this tale?
Japan as a country doesn't like to lose its assets. Nissan is one of the crown jewels of Japan, and Japan has a reputation deservedly of punishing people to make a point. When cryptocurrency was something that the Japanese government decided they wanted to promote within Japan, and Mt. Gox collapsed, which was run by a Frenchman named Mark Karpeles, there was a demand that something be done. $500 million worth of Bitcoin vanished. There was a French CEO in charge of the company. He ran everything, kind of like Carlos Ghosn. They decided that he must be guilty. They arrested him 3 times. Carlos Ghosn has been arrested 4 times, so Karpeles loses on that aspect. And then after 2 years, and 1 year of which Karpeles was held in detention and not allowed to go on bail, when the final trial finally came, it turned out that the prosecutors had caught the wrong guy, and he was found not guilty of the charges against him. So in watching what's happening to Ghosn, I have this terrible sense of deja vu. Is, a scenario has been decided. We arrest the foreign CEO to show that we're doing something about a problem, and then we keep arresting him until he confesses, but no, he won't confess. And then when you go to trial, the results may not be what you expected they to be.
Is there a symbiotic relationship between politicians and captains of industry?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, politicians and captains of industry hobnob with each other. They make donations to the Japan Business Federation called Keidanren. I mean, they're one and the same. They're very well connected, and probably one of Ghosn's problems was that he didn't put many executives on the board of Nissan until last year. So people from METI were unhappy that there weren't these great posts for them when they retired at Nissan, like they are at other Japanese car companies. So it's bureaucracy, politicians, business, all of them commingling that makes Japan work.
When you look at Airbus, when you look at Air France, when you look at Renault, the state has these minority shares that are golden shares, right? Because they have a lot of clout on the board of these companies. Is France the same as Japan in your view, Jessica Finel?
Oh, again, I'm not in a position to respond to that.
But you heard the remarks earlier there of the French finance minister. With public opinion here turning against Carlos Ghosn, could that spell a lot of trouble for him if the French state also applies weight?
A lot of trouble for the case in Japan, you mean?
For the case here and in Japan.
Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, in France now, the public prosecutor has been have had this information brought to its attention. There's going to be a preliminary examination. We don't know at all what is going to be the issue. What it's going to end up with. So we'll see. Justice will work and will do his job. I'm more confident in the French justice, I have to say, now experiencing how it's been with Carlos Ghosn since his arrest, than the Japanese justice. So we'll just see, and he will defend himself. He has to.
Hildine, final question. What's next for the Renault-Nissan alliance?
The Renault-Nissan alliance is very important to both companies, and we have to bring Daimler into this picture because Daimler is part of this alliance now. And Daimler has got technology that Infiniti wants to use. The future of the cooperation is very important. And I was quite pleased that the Renault and Nissan together decided to audit the company in the Netherlands, because that meant there's still good communication between the people who run these two companies. They can get together and say, okay, let's do an audit. Let's find out what really happened.
And beyond that, will this alliance continue? Will we move towards a merger? Will we not?
I think that a merger has always been a bad idea. It was a bad idea in 1999, when Louis Schweitzer first called the alliance the Nissan-Renault Alliance to give face to Nissan. That was the first time he referred to it, after it became Renault-Nissan, because Renault is the big partner in the game. But it's very important for success that both companies feel that they're doing something on their own, and yet they can work together to save money. This is what didn't happen when Renault bought Volvo, or tried to buy Volvo. It's what didn't happen with many other mergers and acquisitions between Ford and Mazda, between Mitsubishi and PSA. They had deals for a while. Most of them have not worked, and Renault-Nissan did work. Was the biggest volume car company last year.
And we'll see if it works after Carlos Ghosn. Many thanks, William Dean. I want to thank Jake Adelstein for joining us from Tokyo. Jessica Finel. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.